Hey everyone, this is Chris with LearnWebLogicOnline.com, and in this demonstration I'm going to show you how you can deploy WebLogic on OCI in a matter of minutes rather than hours using a tool called the OCI Resource Manager. Now, the OCI Resource Manager is essentially a terraform as a service. And if you're not familiar with terraform, terraform is a tool that allows us to create infrastructure using code, using declarative statements. And so we will be leveraging pre-built Terraform scripts to rapidly deploy a production-like environment for deploying WebLogic. So here is a deployment diagram or a network diagram of what we are going to build using the OCI Resource Manager. In OCI, we are going to be creating a virtual cloud network to host all of our resources. And within that virtual cloud network, we're going to be deploying a 2-node WebLogic cluster with an admin server. And that WebLogic cluster is going to live in a private subnet. A public load balancer will be created to provide access to the test or demo application that will be deployed to that WebLogic cluster. So here on the left-hand side, we have app users that will be accessing our application through the load balancer from the internet. And then since this WebLogic cluster is deployed to a private subnet, we need a way of accessing and administering our WebLogic domain from the internet. So that's where we're going to deploy our Bastion server. We'll have a Bastion server in our public subnet that will have a public IP, and you will access that Bastion server from the internet using an SSH key that you provide. And then the way we'll get to the WebLogic admin console is by setting up an SSH tunnel through that Bastion server to the admin server. So if all this looks somewhat complicated, don't worry. We are basically going to use the OCI Resource Manager to set this up with just a few clicks. And I'll show you how easy it is to create a production environment on Oracle Cloud. So let's talk about what's required for executing this demo. You obviously need to have access to an OCI tenancy. And if you don't have access to an OCI tenancy, you can sign up for your own tenancy at cloud.oracle.com. As of the production of this demo, you can get up to $300 in credits when you sign up for a new tenancy. And that can go towards the costs associated with this demo. Now, when I ran this demo the first time, I think I only incurred around 60 cents. We spun it up, we created the environment, and then I immediately tore it down. So keep that in mind when you're running through this demo if you're cost conscious. Once you have a tenancy, you need to have sufficient privileges in that tenancy to create things, to create OCI resources. Now, if your company already has a tenancy, then they'll need to grant you access to create these resources. And I'll provide a detailed description of what policies are required to create these resources. However, if you are signing up for a new tenancy or are the tenant admin of that tenancy, then you already have access and privileges to create these resources since you are by default a tenant admin. So for the purposes of this demo, I'm assuming that you are a tenant admin. In item 3 here, this is just, you must accept responsibility for any costs associated with this demo. You'll be creating infrastructure in the cloud, and some of the resources that you will create do actually cost money, specifically some of the compute instances and the block storage volumes that sit behind those compute instances. However, the costs are quite minimal. Like I said, when I ran through this, I think it cost me, it was less than $1. You'll also need PuTTY or SSH client installed. This will be used for setting up that SSH tunnel to our admin server so that we can access the admin console. And then you'll need to have an SSH key pair available for setting up that SSH tunnel. And there are many online tutorials around how to create an SSH key pair. Now, before we create our WebLogic environment, we need to set up our identity provider. So we will be using IDCS for this, and IDCS is Oracle Cloud's identity cloud service. So I need to access the IDCS console to set up some groups and a confidential application, which is what will be used to integrate WebLogic with IDCS for authentication. So here is by default, every tenancy is federated with Oracle Identity Cloud Service. And here is the URL for our IDCS console. So I'm going to log into this IDCS console, and I need to create a confidential application. So we'll click on Applications, and then we'll click Add. And I'll specify confidential application. We'll give this a name. And then click Next. And we will configure this as a client. So check the box for client credentials. And then under Grant the Client Access, we're going to add 2 roles here. We're going to add CloudGate and Identity Domain Admin. These 2 roles enable WebLogic to access our IDCS instance. Now, IDCS is where we're going to be creating our users and groups for accessing our domain and the sample application that gets deployed. Okay, go ahead and click Next here. And then we can click Next again, and then Next again for web tier policy, and then we'll click Finish. Okay, very important. You need to save off the client ID and the client secret. So just copy these values. I'm going to put them in my notepad for the moment. And click Close. And then now you can go ahead and activate the application. So all this is doing, it's setting up an integration point within IDCS so that WebLogic can talk to IDCS. That's all this is doing. It's enabling OAuth essentially between WebLogic and the WebLogic identity asserter, and IDCS. Okay, so this is activated. We now need to create a group. This group will be used for application users that want to access the demo application. So under Groups, click Add Group, and the demo application that comes with WebLogic requires a very specific group. So we're just going to play along with the demo and create this very poorly named group called Sample App Admin, and then click Next, and then I'm going to add myself to this group. So you can add yourself to this group. If you need to add users, I'll show you how to do that in a moment really quick. So I've added myself to this group. If you need to add users, you can do so under Users here, and then you can click the Add button and go through the motions of creating a new user. It's fairly straightforward. Okay, one more thing we need to note. When we configure our WebLogic domain, we do need the IDCS tenant ID. So that is in the URL here. So what you want to do is you want to copy from the IDCS portion all the way to the end of the GUID. So you want to copy that. Yours will be globally unique, different than mine, but we want to copy this piece here. And put that in Notepad as well, because we'll be using that later. Okay, I think we have IDCS all set up. So now what we need to do is flip back to the OCI console. So the next step in our demo is to set up an OCI Vault. An OCI Vault is essentially a key and secret store. So we need this because the WebLogic on OCI product actually uses Vault to store the domain admin password and the client secret for connecting to IDCS to support authentication. So let's go ahead and create that OCI Vault now. So I'm going to click on the hamburger here and scroll all the way down to Security and then Vault. So there's 2 pieces to the vault. Let's go ahead and create a new vault actually. Go ahead and create, I already have an old one here, but I'm going to call it WL Demo Vault. Once the vault is created, we can go ahead and create that master encryption key. Let's do that now. And you can leave all the other values defaulted, just provide a name for the master encryption key and then click Create. And now we can go ahead and create our secrets. So we're going to create 2 secrets. The first one is going to be for storing the domain admin password. So I'm going to go ahead and call this the WL domain admin password. And it does need a description. And then under encryption key, we'll specify the master encryption key that we just created. And then the contents. So this is anything you want it to be. This is the actual password that we're going to specify. So I'm just going to generate some random string and paste that in here, and then click Create Secret. Okay. And what we need to do is we need to copy the OCID. An OCID is an Oracle Cloud Identifier. It's a globally unique ID for a resource within OCI. We need this value when we go and create the WebLogic domain. Basically, we're going to tell WebLogic where our secret is stored, where the password for the domain admin is stored. We're going to provide this OCID value. And then during the creation process of the WebLogic domain, WebLogic will go out and fetch the secret using this OCID. So I'm going to copy this value and save it for later. And now I'm going to create another secret, and this one is for the client secret that we generated earlier when we configured that confidential application in IDCS. So I'm going to just give this one a name. I'm going to call it WL client. Oops, let's do this. IDCS client secret. And again, we'll use the same master key to encrypt it. And then as far as the secret contents go, you are actually going to paste in the client secret that you saved off earlier. And if you don't have this value still, you can log back into the IDCS console and navigate to the application that you created, and there is a button to show you what the secret is. So you can get this value back if you don't have it. All right. And again, I need the OCID for this secret as well. So I'm going to copy the value. Okay. Just going to double check that I've got the right OCIDs in place. Okay, now that we've got IDCS set up and we've got our secrets defined, we can actually go ahead and start creating our WebLogic environment. So to do that, we are going to use some out-of-the-box terraform scripts that are available through the OCI Marketplace. And to get to the Marketplace, you can go under Solutions and Platform in the navigation menu and select Marketplace and All Applications. And then up here, I'm just going to type in WebLogic to filter out. And then the one I'm going to select is the WebLogic Server Enterprise Edition. This allows us to actually deploy clustered WebLogic domains. Whereas the Standard Edition does not allow you to deploy clusters. Standard Edition allows you to provision one managed server, but does not support WebLogic clustering. Okay, and then over here on the right, we can specify the version of WebLogic that we want to use. I'm going to pick the default version, which happens to be one of the latest versions, 12.2.1.4. And then specify a compartment. So you should have a compartment that you created where you want to create this environment in. So I've got an existing compartment called OCI Labs that we're going to do this in. And then I'm going to launch my stack. Okay, and then we can provide a name for this stack. A stack is essentially a terraform template. So we'll just call this our demo stack, and we'll create it in the OCI Labs compartment, which is the compartment that I created, and then we'll click Next. And so now we can tell Oracle to prefix any of the OCI resources that it will create with a certain prefix value. And that's a great way to distinguish what resources are specific to this demonstration that we're performing today versus existing resources that you may have in your tenancy. So I'm just going to prefix everything with WL demo. So when OCI executes this stack or a set of Terraform scripts, it will put WL demo in front of each and every resource. The next field here specifies the compute shape for our WebLogic server. So there are many different types of shapes that are supported for this particular terraform stack. I'm going to specify one of the flex shapes, and then we're going to specify one OCPU, or Oracle Compute Unit. And then now we have to specify our public SSH key. So I'm going to paste in my public SSH key. I generated this in PuttyGen and then copied the public key into this window. And for this, you can specify as many WebLogic server nodes as you'd like. Well, up to 8, I suppose. The maximum is 8, but can be scaled out to 30 according to the note here. But for the purposes of this demonstration, I'm just going to create one WebLogic server node. And then WebLogic for our admin server name. And this is where we specify the password for the WebLogic admin. And we don't actually type in the actual password. We're going to specify the OCID of the secret that we created earlier. So I'm going back to my notepad. I'm going to copy that OCID value. Paste that in here. Okay. And then if you check the box for instance advanced configuration, you'll see all the default ports, and you can certainly override any of these. I recommend keeping the default ports and make sure that deploy sample application is checked. And then under WebLogic server network, we can define a new virtual cloud network, and that's what we want to do. So I'm going to pick create new VCN. We will create it in the OCI Labs compartment, and then we can give the VCN a name. It's a logical name. And by default, OCI defaults some of the CIDR values, which is fine. We'll create a new subnet for our WebLogic compute instances, and we want to put them in a private subnet. So let's pretend for a moment that we're building a production environment. We don't want our WebLogic application server sitting directly on the internet, right? We're going to, if you recall back to the network diagram I showed at the beginning of the demo, we're going to create our WebLogic servers in a private subnet, and then we'll put a public load balancer in front of them so that we can access them. You can leave all the CIDR ranges alone, and then under Bastion host shape, you can leave the default shape, and then check the box to provision a load balancer. And don't check the private load balancer. We want a public load balancer, so leave the private unchecked. You can leave the CIDR block for the load balancer subnet alone. Minimum and maximum bandwidth, set the maximum to 10. We're just doing a demonstration here. OCI supports a flexible load balancer shape, so to speak. So you set a minimum amount of bandwidth that you want that load balancer to support, and then you can also define an upper bound for the amount of bandwidth that that load balancer will support. And that allows you to meet kind of, if you've got spiky workloads, let's say you've got a holiday shopping season and you need to support increased demand during that time, a flexible load balancer allows you to scale up instantly without you having to do anything to support that demand. Okay, so just leave it at 10 and 10. Under Identity Cloud Service integration, yes, we want to enable authentication using Identity Cloud Service. This goes back to the confidential application that we created in the IDCS console. Under IDCS tenant, copy the tenant ID that we got from the URL. So what you'll see here, okay, this right here is the tenant ID for my IDCS instance. Now I got this value from, here's my IDCS console up here. I got that tenant ID value from the URL. So right here. So you can get the URL for your IDCS console by going back into the OCI console and looking under Identity and Federation, and the link to the IDCS console will be there for you. This is unique per tenant, per customer. Okay. All right. So that's our tenant ID. The IDCS client ID, this was created when we set up the confidential application. So this is not a secret, so it's just, that's the client, that's the actual client ID. The client secret for the application, now we put that in the OCI Vault, so I need the OCID for the client secret. Remember, we created two secrets in OCI Vault. One was the domain admin password, and one was for the client secret. So that's the client secret OCID, and then you can leave all the other defaults alone. The OCI policies checkbox. This Terraform stack will automatically create the necessary IAM policies to make this domain work with OCI. So you want to leave this box checked. We are not going to provision JRF. This requires that we have a database also deployed so we can connect our domain to it. And we didn't deploy a database as part of this demonstration. We certainly could have, but we did not. So leave that unchecked. Leave the application data source unchecked. And then tags you can leave alone. Go ahead and click next. And so here on the screen, you can review all the changes that we specified or the configuration parameters that we specified. And if everything looks good, you can go ahead and click Create. So basically what's happening now is the OCI Resource Manager is running a Terraform plan and a Terraform apply to create all the infrastructure needed to support our WebLogic domain. And as part of this job that's running, WebLogic domain will also be created. So WebLogic will be installed and a domain will be created. So as you can see, while the Resource Manager job is running, you can take a look at the logs. And these logs, this is essentially output from Terraform running the Terraform plan. And so you can scroll down here and see what's actually going on. Oracle is creating, or Terraform is creating, all the various resources that are needed to support this particular configuration of WebLogic on OCI. All right, so everything looks good on my end. What I'm going to do now is we need to get the public IP address of our load balancer, because now we can go ahead and try to access the sample application. So right now, WebLogic is up and running on our compute instances. And I can show you that. If I go to compute and then instances, and then make sure that you're under compartment, you specify the compartment where you created everything. So I have both a Bastion compute instance, and I have my a secondary compute instance. This compute instance is in the private subnet and has our admin server and a managed server running on it. And the Bastion instance is what we are going to use to set up an SSH tunnel. We need the SSH tunnel in order to get to the WebLogic admin console. Okay, but for now, let's test to see if we can access the sample application that was deployed. For that, I need the load balancer public IP address. So I'm going to go to networking, load balancers. So I'm going to copy the public IP address and then open up a new tab so we can access that sample application. So it's HTTPS, and then there's the public IP, and then it's sample-app. And there's our sample application. Now, because the Resource Manager stack uses a self-signed certificate for enabling SSL, you will probably get an error in your browser warning you about how the site is not secure, it's not safe. Go ahead and accept the risk to proceed to the sample application. It's perfectly fine. Now, let's try accessing the WebLogic admin console. Because the admin console is running in a private subnet, we need to access it by setting up an SSH tunnel between our computer and through the Bastion host, or to the Bastion host. But first, before I can set up PuTTY, I need the public IP of our Bastion server. So go back to compute and then instances, and then find the Bastion instance here, and I'm going to copy this public IP address, and then I'm going to bring up PuTTY. Okay, I got a bunch of sessions here. So what I'm going to do is under host name, I'm going to specify the username first. So the username for our Bastion instance is OPC. It's a default user that Oracle creates. And then the public IP of the Bastion server. And I'm going to call this my demo Bastion. I'm going to save that. Now under SSH, under auth, So now I'm going to specify the private SSH key that I created at the beginning. There's my private key. And then now to configure the tunnel, I click on tunnels here, and we're going to set up a tunnel between our computer and the Bastion host. And what we're going to do is we're going to define a local port. So Putty's going to basically open up a local listening port that will allow us to forward web traffic through the Bastion host to our admin server. So before I can do that, I actually need the private IP address of my admin server, and that's this WLS-0 machine. So I'm going to click on that, and then here's the private IP address of that instance. So I'm going to copy that value, and then the source port. So back in Putty, our source port is any port, a high numbered port on our machine that's available. So I'm going to call it 107001. Can be any number above 1024 that you want to use. And then for destination, it's the private IP address of the admin server, and the destination port. And the destination port is the default admin server port, which is 7001. Okay. And then don't forget to click add. All right, so we've got our tunnel defined, and then we have our private key for authentication defined. And then in our session, we've got our username and the public IP of the Bastion defined. So I'm going to go ahead and save this session. And then now I should be able to click open to open that connectivity. You'll be asked to trust the host. Click yes. And so here we are. We are logged into the Bastion server as OPC. So leave this terminal window open. So the next thing for us to do is to configure our browser to use a proxy. To do that, I'm going to click on, this is for Firefox, so this will vary depending on the type of browser you have. But under options, I can search proxy, and I'll configure my proxy settings, and then we'll do a manual configuration. So for the HTTP proxy, we're going to specify localhost, and then the port will be 10,700. This is the local port that we specified when we set up the SSH tunnel. And then I'll click OK. Then I can close that window. And then now I will open up a new tab, and then I'll access the console using, the private IP of the admin server, :7001/console. So you specify the private IP of the admin server, and then the destination port, which is 7001, and then /console. And then here we are. Here is our console login. So I'll log in as WebLogic, and then the password that we specified. And here you are. We're in the WebLogic console. So this looks just like any other typical WebLogic domain, and that's because it is. So if I click on environment and then servers, we can see that we have our admin server and our managed server 1 here. And we have a default WebLogic cluster set up as well. And so that's pretty much it. That's how you can quickly use OCI and a resource manager stack to quickly provision a WebLogic environment in Oracle Cloud. And so I can start and stop these servers just like I would if this environment was on premise. Now, if I go back to my OCI console and go to instances, I can also control the lifecycle of the actual compute instance themselves by clicking on the ellipsis here and then selecting stop, reboot, start, and terminate. And if you want to tear everything down, when you're done, go back to, where'd it go? Resource Manager under Solutions and Platform here, and then specify stacks. And then here is our Resource Manager stack that we created. So click on your stack, and then under Terraform actions, you can destroy your stack. And this command will delete every resource that was created by Terraform for this particular demonstration. So I can destroy my stack, and I can also reapply it. So if I want to bring it back, if I want to recreate it from scratch, you can just reapply it. You don't need to go back to the marketplace and create a whole new one. You can simply just recreate it from here by clicking apply. So I'll just click destroy for now since I'm all done, and then we'll just destroy. And that's it. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me directly via email or head on over to techtipsondemand.com. I want to thank you for taking the time to watch this demonstration. I hope you found this video very informative, very helpful. It's actually pretty awesome that there are tools out there that make deploying and running WebLogic domains and servers on cloud infrastructure relatively easy. And there's no better place to run your WebLogic workloads than Oracle Cloud. The domain that we deployed today was easily scalable, easily elastic. We could set up auto scaling within this domain where additional compute instances could be created and additional managed servers deployed to those compute instances. So you really have a good foundation here for an elastic WebLogic domain. So if you want to learn more about OCI, I have a brand new course called A Practical Guide to Oracle Cloud Infrastructure. And in this course, I teach the fundamentals of OCI. We cover core cloud computing concepts, the compute service, virtual cloud networking and how to secure it, block and object storage, and even load balancing, as well as identity and access management, including a brief introduction to IDCS, or the Identity Cloud Service. And so with this course, you get hours of lectures and a very in-depth hands-on lab exercise. So head on over to techtipsondemand.teachable.com to learn more about this brand new course. Thank you.